Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Feldman. I'm the Director of Water UCI. It's my privilege to welcome you to Plastic Pollution 101, History, Impacts, and Solutions for Change. This is our first Speaking of Water webinar of 2026, and it is my great pleasure to welcome Emily Parker, Masters of Advanced Studies and Senior Marine Scientist at Heal the Bay. Plastic pollution, as you all know, has recently become a household topic, but this issue is so much more than a straw in a sea turtle's nose or a seabird's belly full of bottle caps. The real story behind plastic goes deeper. And to understand it, we must first explore the history of plastic production and how we got to our modern era. Emily will cover the myriad impacts plastic pollution has on ecosystems and communities and the best available solutions to solve this problem. Emily focuses primarily on plastic pollution reduction efforts and on co-leading the Reusable LA Coalition to promote reuse and refill across the Los Angeles region. She also oversees other ocean conservation initiatives at Heal the Bay, including marine protected area monitoring and coastal resiliency. She has a Master's of Advanced Studies in Marine Biodiversity and Conservation from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. And she also holds a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies from Elon University. When not advocating for ocean rights, Emily can almost always be found on the shore, catching a wave or soaking up LA sunshine with her family. I want to thank our sponsors for the Water UCI seminar series, Speaking of Water. You can see it on the invitation to our webinar. So thank them for their support. And after Emily's talk, we will then open it up for Q&A. There is a link on your website, which will allow you to put your questions in there, and we'll go ahead and go from there. Emily, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Feldman, for that wonderful introduction. I'd like to also thank the entire team for having me here today. I'm really honored and really excited to talk to you all about plastic pollution. So, as was mentioned today, we're going to be covering a lot. We're going to talk about the history of plastics, how this issue became such a pervasive pollution problem. We're going to talk about the impacts of plastic pollution and the impacts that this source of pollution has on communities and on ecosystems. But we're also going to talk about solutions and how we can solve this problem together. You've already heard a lot about me, but a little bit more. I do currently work at Heal the Bay as a senior scientist. I've been there for about 7 years now, and I have specialized in marine debris and plastic pollution for my entire career, so well over a decade. I've also spent some time studying sea turtles, my other passion, so feel free to ask me questions at the very end about that as well. I'm a scientist, I'm an advocate and activist. And I'm really excited to talk to you all today about this particular issue. So to begin, I want to go back to the basics, and I want to talk about what plastic actually is, when it was invented, and what we used to use it for. This information might seem slightly out of touch with plastic pollution as a water issue, but these are essential building blocks for understanding the plastic pollution crisis we now find ourselves in. Plastic is what we call a polymer. I'm going to get a little chemistry on you here, so stay with me. Polymers are chains of similar molecules called monomers that are bonded together. These bonds are very strong, and we see polymers in nature very often. Many plants are made up of polymer structures called cellulose, and even our own DNA is a polymer. Plastic is a little bit different. Plastic is a human-made polymer that comes from fossil fuels. We're going to talk a lot more about that later in this presentation. Plastic is synthetic in its modern form, and its molecular structure is not found in nature. This is why it can be made into so many different things, but also why it has become such a major pollution issue. So we're going to go back in time and talk about when plastic was first invented. It all started with these two inventors, Alexander Parks and John Wesley Hyatt. Back in 1862, Alexander Parks unveiled an incredible new invention at the Great International Exhibition in London, England, the first ever semi-synthetic plastic, dubbed Parkesine, named after the man who'd invented it. It wasn't until years later, however, that a use was found for this new material. In 1869, John Wesley Hyatt had been experimenting with Parkesine. He was trying to invent a new cheap material for game pieces, like checkers and chess pieces or billiard balls. Back then, these game pieces were actually made out of ivory. Ivory comes from elephant tusks and was very expensive, it was leading to elephants becoming hunted to the brink of extinction. Hyatt succeeded in his invention, and the first ever fully synthetic human-made plastic was born. This new material was called celluloid, and these men didn't know it then, but this new invention would change our world forever. Celluloid, this early plastic, is perhaps best remembered for being used to make cinema film, but it was also used for piano keys and even false teeth. Then, a few decades later, in 1907, a new form of plastic was invented and patented by Belgian chemist Leo Baekeland. It was called Bakelite, and it was so strong and so durable it could withstand heat and electricity. It was also easy to mass produce and was used for all sorts of items like telephones, hair dryers, radios, clocks, cameras, and microphones. You may even recognize some of the materials or the items on this slide. I know I do. I remember seeing a telephone like the one pictured here at my grandmother's house. This new material, Bakelite, sparked a boom in consumer demand that would eventually change the global market forever. Once Bakelite products hit shelves, it took no time at all for petroleum and chemical industries to start forming alliances and to begin producing more and more new types of plastic. In the 1930s, polyethylene, the world's most abundant plastic that makes up many modern-day single-use plastic, finally made its debut. It was strong, flexible, and heat-resistant, and was soon dubbed a wonder material, and its use quickly began to skyrocket. Through the decades, more and more types of plastic were invented for new and different uses, and the world wars in particular caused a massive acceleration in plastic diversification and invention. Bakelite was used in the grips of weaponry. Polyethylene was used for the very first time as radar cable insulation during World War II. Nylon was then invented to replace silk during a silk shortage and was used for parachutes for soldiers. We still use it today for items like fabric and clothing, carpets, and sports equipment. Fluoropolymers were accidentally invented, and they've been used from everything to coating our nonstick pans to protecting firefighters and soldiers from the heat of fire. Acrylic and plexiglass were used in the earliest military airplanes and are still used today in construction. These different materials advanced aerospace and communications technology, and honestly, they helped save millions of lives during the World Wars. Plastic truly was considered a miracle material and in many ways makes up the foundation of modern medicine, transportation, and technology. So, where did we go wrong? How did we go from harnessing the power of this invention for creating miraculous new innovations to a major worldwide pollution crisis? The answer is disposable, single-use plastic. The post-war period saw a massive increase in plastic production, but this increase was not driven by consumer demand, but rather an overabundance of cheap, raw fossil fuels and an increase in infrastructure to refine and manufacture those fossil fuels into plastic products during the world wars. And what happens when you have too much supply and not enough demand? Well, you have to manufacture demand. As Mr. McGuire said to Benjamin Braddock in the movie The Graduate, just one word: plastics. There's a great future in plastics. Hopefully some of you get that old movie reference. As the oil industry sought consumer demand, society was simultaneously pressuring working women, who had left their homes during the wars to take up factory jobs to return to the home. This perfect storm of circumstances led to the first single-use plastics introduced to consumers. Chemical company DuPont unveiled cellophane, which first hit shelves in the late 1920s but exploded in popularity during and after the Second World War. Market competitor Dow Chemical released Saran wrap, a household plastic wrap that's still used in millions of kitchens around the world today. These products were marketed directly to women under the guise of making the role of a housewife seem easy and therefore desirable. Believe it or not, plastic pollution is also a feminist issue, not just an environmental one. You can actually see original advertisements for cellophane and saran wrap here on the screen, and I can't get enough of these old advertisements. They crack me up every time I see them. I mean, the best things in life come in cellophane with babies wrapped in plastic. It really was something else. In the ensuing decades, more and more single-use plastic products started to hit shelves. In 1960, Dart Container introduced foam coffee cups made from expanded polystyrene, or a material that many of us know as styrofoam. Disposable diapers replaced reusable cloth diapers the following year. Plastic milk jugs came next, the beginning of the end of the milkman era. Plastic bags and six-pack rings soon followed, and by the beginning of the 1970s, plastic food packaging was starting to become ubiquitous. Finally, the true nail in the coffin of reusable products, the world's very first single-use plastic bottle. Clear like glass, strong enough to withstand carbonation, light and moldable, and most importantly, cheap. The single-use plastic bottle took off immediately and has now become perhaps the most infamous disposable plastic. Chemical company Monsanto made the easygoer plastic bottle for Coca-Cola, which was first unveiled in 1975 and then remade in 1978 from polyethylene, or PET. And this bottle now remains unchanged to this very day. Now, over 500 billion plastic PET bottles are bought worldwide every single year. That's over 1 million per minute. The staggering growth of single-use plastic was significant enough to truly remake civilization. These petroleum-based products fueled and normalized overconsumption under the guise of convenience, making disposable the new normal instead of durable and reusable. American-based petrochemical companies not only invented disposable products, but fabricated the very concept of disposability. While we still use plastic today to create multi-use products like electronics, much of the plastic produced today is single-use. Plastic makers lost their way, taking a material that was once designed to last forever. Remember, it was designed to replace ivory, and using it to make products that are often used for only seconds before being tossed. With production far outpacing waste infrastructure, disposable plastic has now found its way into every corner of the earth, bringing with it detrimental impacts on ecosystems, on wildlife, and on our own bodies. So now let's take a moment to look at plastic today. We can look at how plastic is produced, how it is disposed of, and how this plastic impacts the environment and our communities across its entire life cycle. To do this, we need to understand the entire life cycle of plastic, or as my friends at Break Free from Plastic like to call it, the plastic pollution death cycle. Well before plastic lands in our possession, it contributes to pollution. Plastic is a fossil fuel product. Not everyone knows this, and it pollutes at every single stop of its production cycle, from extraction to production to the point of sale and to excessive use, all the way through to the waste industry and to dumping and burning in the environment. We're going to take some time to track plastic from the moment those raw materials are pulled from the ground until its disposal and look at the impacts at each and every single stage. To fully understand this, we need to fully understand how plastic is actually made in the modern era. To make plastic, fossil fuels must first be extracted from the earth through processes like drilling for oil and fracking for natural gas. These crude products must then be refined into gases like ethane at refineries, and then further processed into plastic polymers at petrochemical facilities. All of these industrial processes cause air pollution. The health risks of living in close proximity to these industrial activities, which is true for millions of people around the world, are devastating and very well documented. Pollutants from oil and gas extraction and refining leads to a range of chronic health symptoms, including eye and nasal irritation, sinus problems, headaches, skin problems, severe fatigue, loss of smell, nosebleeds, psychological stress, lung irritation, and the worsening of existing conditions like asthma. This air pollution can even harm reproductive health and increase the risk of birth defects and miscarriage. This air pollution doesn't only harm the people living nearby, it also contributes to climate change. Drilling, fracking, refining, shipping, all of these activities release greenhouse gas emissions, worsening the climate crisis, which comes with its own slew of impacts on ecosystems and humans alike. Nowhere is this more true than right here in Los Angeles. I know we're all here virtually and maybe joining from many different places around the region or even around this state or country. But here where I live and work in Los Angeles, the plastic economy starts at the fence line. LA was and remains the largest urban oil field in the country, with thousands of active oil wells in the greater LA area located amongst a dense population of more than 10 million people, making this region our nation's neighborhood drilling capital. In fact, the fossil fuel industry played a huge role in LA's early development. This was the wild west of oil extraction, with an abundance of easily accessible oil, minimal regulation, and no understanding of the health or environmental impacts to create a true free-for-all. We currently don't have a great means of comprehensively tracking oil-related activity in LA, which leaves residents in the dark about the industrial activity taking place near their homes. But what we do know is that roughly 1/3 of all Angelenos live within a mile of an active drilling site, and over 500,000 people are within just a quarter mile. I actually used to be one of them. I used to live in Signal Hill, and I had oil drills in my own backyard, which, as someone who came from the East Coast, was a huge shock when I first moved here. That said, research shows that of those living within 1,500 feet of an active oil well in the city of LA, 74% are people of color. The reality is that the majority of LA's industrial oil activity takes place in low-income and minority communities, where residents aren't afforded the same regulatory protections as individuals living in affluent areas. Drilling sites in South LA or Wilmington are, on average, 300 feet closer to homes than those in places like West LA or Wilshire, in addition to having even fewer safety protections. And it doesn't stop at drilling. Along Refinery Row in Wilmington and Carson, the Marathon LA refinery, pictured here on the bottom right, is one of the largest refineries on the West Coast and one of 6 in the LA region, 5 of which are in Wilmington. This refinery operates beside communities already burdened by drilling, port, and freight pollution. Los Angeles is a microcosm of the global plastics life cycle, with oil drilling and refining disproportionately overburdening our communities right here at home. At the fence line of these industrial practices are environmental justice communities. These communities are largely Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, and low income. This phenomenon is true across the entire globe. The true cost of single-use plastic shows up first as asthma, flares, leaks, and chronic illness and stress. The benefits of this plastic may be dispersed, but the burdens are concentrated. That is an environmental injustice. And this is just the start of the plastic cycle. You may notice a trend as I go along in these slides. The impacts of plastic pollution are disproportionately felt by environmental justice communities across the entire cycle, across the entire globe. So now we're in the stage of the cycle where the plastic has been created. The fossil fuels have been extracted, they've been refined, and turned into the plastic products that we use every day. The fact of the matter is, plastic is now prolific. We cannot avoid it, even when we actively try. Look around you right now. I'd bet you can find at least 5 plastic items in your line of sight right this very moment. I know that I can. Or recall your last trip to the grocery store. Picture the shelves in the aisles. It would be near impossible to leave that store with the things we need to live every single day without bringing home plastic, specifically single-use plastic. That is not by accident. No, that's very much purposeful. According to the UN, over 460 million metric tons of plastic are produced every single year. That number is hard to visualize, but it's equivalent to 23 million garbage trucks of just plastic. That's enough truckloads to wrap around the globe 800 times end to end. By the time I finish this sentence, another truckload will enter the global plastic system. And the plastics industry is ramping up, not down. Based on industry plans, estimates predict that this number will triple by 2050. Much of this plastic is single use, meaning it's often used for only seconds, but lasts for centuries. Even worse, this human-made polymer never fully breaks down the way a natural polymer would. Rather, plastic instead degrades into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics, often while we are using a plastic product. Just 5 millimeters or smaller, these microplastics have now been found in every corner of the world and inside our own bodies. From mountaintops to the deep sea, from table salt to soil to tap water, even in our own blood. Some microplastics are so small, they can pass robust defenses in our bodies, like the blood-brain barrier, meaning they can enter our own brains. Nearly every single human being on Earth has microplastics in their bodies, and we're still scratching the surface of what that means for our own health. These microplastics contain a kitchen sink of chemicals, whether they were added at the time of production or absorbed in the environment. These chemicals, like bisphenol A or BPA, phthalates, PFAS, they're known endocrine disruptors, meaning they imitate our body's natural hormones and disrupt dozens of natural processes from growth and development to appetite and mood to reproduction. With the ubiquity of plastics in everything we touch, use, and eat every day, we are now living in the plastic era. So what happens to this plastic when we're done with it? Once we're done using a plastic product, whether it's a single-use product or not, it's destined for one of 4 different disposal routes: recycling, landfill, incineration, or our own natural environment. And to be frank, none of these routes are ideal. We're going to take a look first at landfills. When we're done using something, we tend to say that we throw it away. But the reality is there is no such thing as away. Everything we discard has to go somewhere. In California and around the world, that somewhere is usually a landfill. And those landfills are filling up. They were never designed to last forever, and yet we continue to rely on them as if they're an endless solution. Right here in LA, we're actually home to the largest landfill in the entire country, Puente Hills. At its peak, this landfill was as tall as some of LA's highest skyscrapers, a literal mountain of trash that didn't disappear, but instead became a permanent part of our landscape. Landfills are overwhelmingly located in environmental justice communities, and they have very real, very serious impacts on the people who live nearby. One local example is Chiquita Canyon Landfill, which is LA's 2nd largest active landfill. Chemical reactions deep inside this landfill have been generating toxic fumes and unbearable odors for the people that live nearby. In 2024, a massive underground garbage fire forced nearby residents to relocate from their homes. Plastic makes these problems even worse because it doesn't truly break down. It takes centuries to degrade, and even then, it doesn't disappear. Like I mentioned earlier, this plastic just fragments into smaller and smaller pieces. In fact, all of the plastic ever made since back in 1862 still exists in some form today. According to a recent report from CalRecycle, California's waste management agency, single-use packaging and plastic foodware now make up more than 1/5, over 21% of everything sent to California landfills. Every single year, Californians throw away more than 3 million tons of single-use plastic. That's as if every single person living in California, all 39 million of us, is throwing away 160 pounds of single-use plastic directly into a landfill every single year. The impacts don't stop once the plastic is buried in these landfills. As plastic breaks down in these landfills, it can actually release methane, a powerful greenhouse gas that traps about 80 times more heat than carbon dioxide. Even when we're done with it, plastic contributes to climate change. Landfills are the most common resting place for plastic waste and are a completely unsustainable option. So, what do we often hear as a more sustainable option? We hear recycling. So, let's talk about recycling. For decades, we've been told that recycling is the solution to plastic waste. But when it comes to plastic, recycling is unfortunately largely a myth. Since plastic was invented, only about 10% of all of the plastic ever made has been recycled. The rest has been landfilled, burned, or leaked into the environment. A large portion of what we do put in our recycling bins doesn't stay here. Historically, plastic waste from countries like the United States has been exported to countries in the global south, often under the label of recycling. But in reality, this has forced the burden of our plastic waste onto low-income and environmental justice communities where it frequently ends up dumped, burned, or washed into rivers and oceans. Another major challenge is that not all plastics are created equal. There are 7 different types of plastic. I am oversimplifying this a little bit, but the type of plastic is identified by those little numbers on the bottom, called a resin identification code. They go from 1 to 7 and identify different types of plastic based on their molecular structure. In practice, only plastics number 1 and number 2, like beverage bottles and plastic jugs, are commonly recyclable. You can see examples of those here on the slide. Sometimes plastic number 5, which is often used for single-use plastic foodware like clamshells or plates or cups, is accepted in limited programs. But the rest is generally not recyclable at all, even if it has that chasing arrows symbol on the bottom or even if it's placed in a blue bin. According to another recent study released by CalRecycle, plastic recycling rates in California are frankly abysmal. Even the best case plastics, clear polyethylene bottles and jugs, are only reaching recycling rates of around 20%. For most other plastic types, recycling rates fall closer to only 1 to 5%. Even when plastic is recycled, it isn't truly fully recycled the way we think of recycling, taking something and turning it into something entirely new in one closed loop cycle. Plastic is what we call downcycled. Each time plastic is remade into a new product, its quality degrades, meaning most plastic items can actually only be effectively recycled once or twice before they're no longer usable, and they have to be landfilled anyway. That means we're still constantly relying on new virgin plastic made from fossil fuels. Recycled plastic also doesn't solve the pollution problem. Whether it's new or recycled, plastic continues to shed microplastics throughout its life cycle during use, washing, and disposal. The truth is, plastic recycling was never designed to work at scale. Plastic companies have known this for a very long time. Yet the idea of recycling has been promoted as a way to shift responsibility onto consumers, rather than reducing plastic production in the first place. We all learned reduce, reuse, recycle as kids in school. Those first two, reduce and reuse, those I like, but recycle, not so much. This concept is placing the burden of waste reduction onto us, when in reality, this issue requires massive system change that recycling alone just cannot fix. Another option that's sometimes presented as a solution to plastic waste is incineration. At its core, incineration is exactly what it sounds like. It's burning trash, including plastic. In other countries, that often means open burning. Picture just a pile of trash being burned. But here in the US, incineration happens at industrial facilities. When trash is burned, it doesn't disappear, it changes form. Incinerators release a mix of air pollutants, including particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, heavy metals like mercury and lead, and highly toxic compounds like dioxins. These pollutants pose health risks to facility workers and to nearby communities, especially with long-term exposure. Modern incinerators do sometimes use air pollution control equipment, and that can reduce some of the emissions, but it doesn't eliminate the problem, it just shifts it. Many of the captured toxins are concentrated into a toxic ash and wastewater instead of being released into the air. In fact, roughly 1/4 to nearly half of all of the waste burned in an incinerator becomes ash. That ash often contains hazardous substances and must be landfilled or managed as hazardous waste, where it can leach into the soil and into groundwater and potentially entering our food chains. You may have heard the term chemical recycling or even waste to energy facilities that are burning trash to either create energy or to create new products. Unfortunately, as good as they sound, these are false solutions that are incredibly energy intensive, still create a lot of pollution, and they just can't be scaled economically. So incineration doesn't solve the waste problem. It just creates a new one by producing highly toxic byproducts that you still have to dispose of. Incineration also raises serious environmental justice concerns. Here in the US, the vast majority of waste incinerators, about 80% of them, are located in low-income communities and communities of color. Pictured here on the screen is the former incinerator in Long Beach. Residents in Long Beach and nearby communities actually organized together for years around the health and environmental impacts of this facility, and they succeeded. This incinerator has actually now been fully shut down thanks to their efforts. Today, California doesn't have any operating municipal solid waste incinerators left, and that's largely because of community advocacy and the recognition that burning our trash is just not a clean or sustainable solution. Whether it's landfilling, recycling, or incineration, the pattern is the same. We're trying to manage the damage after the fact, and it's just not working. The final destination of this waste, it's often the environment, where it truly wreaks havoc. Once plastic escapes our waste system, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it very quickly becomes a water problem. In cities like Los Angeles and in places all around the world, plastic litter enters our environment primarily through storm drain systems. When it rains or when streets are washed, plastic and other pollutants are swept into catch basins. You've probably seen these on walks around your environment. It's what exists at the end of those gutters, those like holes in the sidewalks, right? And those catch basins flow into streams and creeks and then eventually into rivers and finally into the ocean. In most cases, that water is not captured and cleaned before it enters the ocean, meaning all that waste goes with it. Even plastic dropped hundreds of miles inland doesn't stay there. All waterways are connected, and almost everything that enters them ultimately leads to the ocean. Once plastic enters nature, it causes harm in many ways. As large visible debris, or what we call macroplastics, the stuff that still looks like what it was when we used it, this stuff can entangle wildlife, as you can see in some of these somewhat distressing images on the screen. This is called entanglement, and it can result in restricted movement, which can cause injury or even leading to a slow death by drowning or starvation. I know it's hard to hear and even harder to look at, but this is the reality of what happens when plastic enters our waterways and our oceans. Over time, that same plastic breaks down into microplastics, just like the microplastics we talked about earlier in landfills. And these tiny fragments are often smaller than a grain of rice and are easily ingested by fish, birds, and invertebrates. They're easily mistaken for food and can cause fatal injuries to those animals. These microplastics, oftentimes having absorbed chemicals in the water like a sponge, can then move up the food chain, ultimately winding up in our own bodies, carrying those chemicals along with them through the water we drink and the food that we eat. Plastic pollution has devastating impacts on wildlife worldwide. Ingestion and entanglement have been documented in at least 267 different species, including 86% of all sea turtle species, 44% of all seabird species, and 43% of all marine mammal species. Scientists believe that these numbers are significant underestimates and that plastic pollution is impacting way more animals than we have documented. Plastic also impacts our water systems in less visible ways. Microplastics can alter sediment chemistry. They can transport toxic chemicals and provide surfaces for harmful bacteria to spread through aquatic ecosystems. This is a phenomenon that I just learned about last year. It's called the plastosphere. Plastics have been found in rivers, lakes, groundwater, coastal waters, deep sea sediments, and even the deepest point of our ocean, in our rain, and even in our snow. Once plastic reaches the ocean, cleanup becomes extraordinarily difficult. Waves, currents, these things spread plastic over vast distances, breaking it into fragments that no existing technology can fully recover. At that point, the damage is already done. Plastic pollution in nature isn't just a litter problem. It's a long-term ecological public health issue that affects wildlife, it affects our water quality, it affects our food systems, and ultimately it affects us, our own health. Okay, I just spent the last 30 minutes telling you a lot of bad stuff about how harmful plastic is. And if you're like me, you might be feeling just a little overwhelmed. But the reality is that plastic is a people problem, which means that people can solve it. And this is a problem that can be solved. So let's spend our last few minutes together talking about solutions to the plastic pollution crisis. You've probably heard a few patterns from me today so far, like that plastic is an environmental justice problem. But you've also probably heard that fighting plastic pollution can't be done just from downstream. For example, picture a bathtub that's overflowing with water. You wouldn't immediately go grab a mop to clean up the water. No, you'd first turn off the tap. That is what we have to do. We have to turn off the plastic tap. And while individual action is incredible and it can make a world of difference through creating community awareness and culture shifting, we ultimately can't solve this problem alone as individuals. We need massive system-wide change, and the best way to do that is through policy. I like to think of policy as the best tool in our tool belt, and the best policies focus on reducing waste at the source, or what we call source reduction, focusing upstream and replacing single-use plastic with reusable, refillable, durable alternatives. So let's take a look at some short-term and some long-term policy options. One of the most common examples of policies that are used to fight plastic pollution are problematic material or problematic product bans, like a bag ban or a styrofoam ban. These types of policies are ideal for a specific item that has a particular issue. For example, take styrofoam. It is very lightweight, which means it winds up in the environment very easily. It breaks down into small pieces very quickly, meaning it turns into problematic microplastics and winds up in the food chain very quickly. It also contains styrene, which is a very dangerous chemical, and it just cannot be recycled. So banning styrofoam because of it being a particularly problematic material or particularly problematic product makes a lot of sense. But the plastic pollution advocacy community is now moving towards more comprehensive solutions that focus on comprehensive reuse, refill, and source reduction rather than honing in on single piecemeal product bans. We're seeing this most often right now in foodware, the stuff that we use to eat and eat off of. Think to-go clamshells for your delivery orders, plates, cups, bowls, cutlery, all those single-use plastic products that you get with your to-go food, for example. Disposable plastic foodware is being honed in on right now because it's a significant contributor to plastic pollution. Here in the United States, our restaurant industry actually generates over 11 million tons of plastic waste annually through single-use items like utensils, cups, and straws. And those same businesses, they're spending billions of dollars on these items that they give away for free. These items are used just once and often for on-site dining. Like you go out to eat, you sit down, and you're actually given something disposable to use. That happened to me just last night. And sometimes these items don't even get used once, like a disposable utensil that shows up in a delivery order that you don't need. We've dubbed this zero waste plastic, and it's the worst of the worst. By reducing what isn't needed and replacing single-use items with reusable items, we're not only preventing waste, but we're actually saving businesses a ton of money as well. Reusable foodware for dining in and reuse and refill for takeout and delivery have been incredibly successful in dozens of municipalities across California and across the country. We also see it in other countries as well. This is an incredible short-term solution that works really well to replace problematic disposable products with durable, long-term reusable products. And when paired with things like disincentives for disposables and good zero waste planning, they can work really well in the short term to make a massive dent in reducing single-use plastic waste. We ultimately need even more comprehensive long-term policies. We desperately need to move away from fossil fuels entirely, not just for plastic. And we need the transition away from those fossil fuels to be a just one that takes the communities that rely on these products into account. We also need to start using what we call extended producer responsibility. This is a concept that puts the responsibility of dealing with the waste of a product onto the producer of that product, the company that originally made it in the first place. It should be their responsibility, whether that's financial or logistical, to deal with the waste of the products that they make. We also need to massively upscale reuse and refill infrastructure, and we need to fund it. We need to bring back the era of the milkman, honestly. We need strong source reduction requirements. The same way we have emissions requirements, we need to tell these companies what they have to reduce, because unfortunately, they won't do it on their own. And ultimately, we need a culture shift. If we can invent the concept of disposability, we can also abandon it. Instead of overconsumption, we can reconnect with the things that we use every day. We can rediscover value in our items instead of just seeking joy or profit in making and buying cheap, breakable, disposable things. Reusable is beautiful, and I think it's high time we remember how valuable reusability really is. To finish up today, I want to take a moment to spotlight some amazing real solutions that are happening now, both locally where I live and work in Los Angeles, at the state level in California, and also at the national and international level. Here in LA, there is this really cool ordinance at the LA County level that comprehensively reduces plastic foodware by requiring reuse for dine-in, that idea that I talked about a slide ago. By requiring reuse at restaurants, we're seeing an actual reduction in the single-use plastic that is entering our waste streams, and we're also seeing happier customers and businesses that are saving money. The city of Los Angeles has taken note and is seeking to pass a similar law in the city, which would impact even more businesses in a good way and could potentially create a blueprint for enacting reusables for dine-in service, not just at restaurants, but at event venues as we get ready for the LA 28 Olympics. And that blueprint could be reused at other cities all across the nation and maybe even be passed statewide someday. Speaking of statewide, I want to talk about Senate Bill 54. This is California's Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act. Whew, say that 5 times fast. This law was passed a few years ago and implementation is currently underway. This law is an example of extended producer responsibility, what I was talking about on the last slide. This law enacts certain source reduction requirements and recycling requirements of the producers of plastic products. And it forces those producers to actually come together and work together to take responsibility for the plastic waste they create. I also want to highlight something that's happening at the national level. This past November, the Reuse Act passed the Senate through a bipartisan vote, which is very uncommon these days. And this law would, if passed fully, direct our Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, to develop a report on the feasibility and best practices for reuse and refill systems in the US. And while a report alone definitely isn't enough, it's at least a starting point to get the reuse and refill infrastructure that we desperately need in this country. At the international level, we have the Global Plastics Treaty. This is a UN-led effort to create a legally binding international agreement to address the full life cycle of plastics. After multiple convenings of parties, unfortunately, this treaty still has yet to be ratified due to the powerful interests of oil giants like our own United States. But the global community will keep pushing, as that's the only way we can solve this issue together. All right, folks. I'm going to close with this final key message. If you take away just one thing today, let it be this. The real solutions to plastic pollution are rooted in source reduction and in transitioning away from disposables and towards sustainable, reusable, renewable, and refillable alternatives. We can start where we are every single day to make little changes in our own lives, and we can push for the massive system changes that need to happen. Because ultimately, to stop plastic pollution, we have to stop making plastic. All right, I am ready to take on some questions for the next 10 minutes.
Emily, thank you. That was wonderful. The magnitude of the problem, as illustrated by the statistics and the history, really quite sobering. And the challenges facing us in implementing the solutions, also very, very sobering. We have time for some questions. I want to start with a series of questions, actually, by one of our audience members, Carol Moore. It says that there is a new method which takes the material, meaning the plastics, to a very high temperature and pressure, which actually breaks the bonds, and is being tested in Orange County, Florida, but soon to be brought here to be scaled up. And then she goes on, plasticizers are used in packaging, which are used as wrapping for many food products, as liners in boxes of items such as crackers, as well as frozen foods. What's the alternative? And lastly, I really like this question. Since Heal the Bay supports a cleaner ocean, what is being done about the deposition of waste by the cruise industry?
Ooh, well,
Take any of those in any order.
Those are really, really good questions. To speak to the last question that you have, deposition of waste from the cruise industry, I might not be the right expert to speak to that issue, as it is a really big one, but I worry that I don't know quite enough about that to answer it fully. What I will say that the shipping industry and the cruise industry in general can be challenging because of the difficult jurisdictions. These ships more often than not are crossing international boundaries, which can make them very hard to regulate. That said, I think it's all the more reason for good international cooperation when it comes to the waste that's coming from those ships. But unfortunately, yeah, I'm not really the best expert to answer that particular question. To answer your first question, I think I would need to know a little bit more about the specific process that you're speaking to. However, what I do know about certain types of what we call chemical recycling, which is different from uh, manual recycling, which is what we think of when we think of recycling. We think of, sorting things and then just melting down that item and turning it into something new. Chemical recycling actually breaks down bonds, as you mentioned, right? It breaks down the plastic on a molecular level, so it's unique in that way. And in some ways, I think it can be a very interesting academic pursuit. That said, this particular technology is very difficult to scale for a couple of reasons. Whether you're talking about pyrolysis or gasification, right? There's a number of different types of chemical recycling or advanced recycling that are currently being tested. They are very hard to scale because they require a lot of energy. They're very, very energy intensive. And so ultimately, when you're looking at something that requires that much energy, the risk to benefit scale, it kind of gets outweighed when you're looking at overall benefit, right? When you're looking at something that takes that much energy, it's ultimately not better for the environment. Rather, we should have just not made the item in the first place. So I'm not a big fan of chemical recycling technologies. There's been some really good studies that have come out of groups like Gaia, GAIA, that have shown that chemical recycling it just doesn't work at scale, and that there's many facilities that have tried to make it happen that have unfortunately had to close due to a lack of economic feasibility. So to answer your second question about food packaging is a tough one, and I think it's one of the reasons that I talked a lot about foodware today and not as much about food packaging. But I will say there are great alternatives to fossil fuel based single use plastics when it comes to food packaging. For example, switching to compostable and biodegradable alternatives that are just as good as at preserving our food and ensuring food safety while not coming with the same environmental impacts that fossil fuel based plastic comes with. That said, that is still, a new and emerging area of innovation, and it will only continue to get better with time. But it is there, it is possible, and the food packaging innovators of the world can speak to it far better than I even could. Really good questions. My goodness, I love it.
Thank you, Emily. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any suggestions on how scientists can help shift the culture, especially in environmental justice communities?
I love this question. And I think the reason I like it so much is because I started in the academic world. And I think one of the things I learned in that world is that scientists, particularly those in academia, those in research, I think have historically been encouraged to remain impartial, to only speak to the numbers, to the data. And what we're seeing is that more and more we need desperately for scientists to take on the role of advocate and activist because every day science comes into question. Every day, the things that we as scientists may know to be true are questioned by the general public. And so I think it is not only something to be encouraged, but I think that it is a responsibility of scientists to take on the role of activist, to take on the role of advocate, to speak up for what their research shows. Because honestly, what this research is showing, and I'm speaking specifically about plastic pollution here, but you see this across the board, across so many different environmental impacts, right? Is that the research clearly shows that environmental impacts, pollution burdens, for example, disproportionately burden certain communities over others. It's not an opinion, it's just fact. And that environmental justice, social justice, racial justice, all of these things are so inextricably linked. You can't do one without the other. And so I think that it truly is our duty as scientists to communicate what we know with the public in ways that are easy to understand, to not rely on jargon, but to really take on that role of activist and advocate and to use the science and the data that we collect every day to push for a better world. I think it's our responsibility. My job wouldn't be possible without the academic community. You know, what I do is I act as a bridge between the academic world and the decision-making world. And if the people in charge of making the decisions that affect our lives every single day don't understand the science that could help them build the best solutions possible, then they're not going to create them. And so we have a responsibility to share what we know.
Great. Before we go to our last question, because we nearly are out of time, I do want to mention that this talk is being recorded. We will make it available on our website soon. In addition, Emily, we can also post your slides.
Absolutely.
And on her slides is her contact information. Feel free to contact Emily offline with any further questions or comments. We have a final comment and observation by one of our attendees. At UCLA, I saw reusable foodware that used a QR code to take out and then a drop-off box area where you can scan them back. It was great. You have a response?
Oh my gosh, yes, I know exactly what system you're talking about. I'm a big, big fan, especially considering UCLA is going to be acting as the Olympic Village in just a couple of short years. I think that UCLA is a leader and an innovator in reusables, and it's such a great example of how reusable systems can be built to scale in a way that are really easy to use, that are a good experience for consumers, and that actually ultimately end up saving businesses, or in this case, schools, a lot of money as well, instead of just, pumping money into something that just gets thrown away. I think it's an awesome system. I love reuse systems. I'm a big reuse nerd. And I love to see ones that are both successful and that are, beloved by the people that are using them. That's awesome.
Let's hope we'll all become reuse and recycling nerds as a result of your talk, Emily. This was fantastic. We could certainly go on another hour, if not more. I want to
Easily.
thank you for your talk this afternoon. It's great. Again, this has been recorded. We will post it on the Water UCI homepage, along with your slides and contact information. Thank you again for a wonderful talk, great conversation, and wonderful questions from some of our participants. Have a great rest of the week, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We'll keep you posted on our next Speaking of Water webinar soon. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.